For Graham Crawford, the rain that lashed against the bulletproof glass of his Bentley was a memory. It was the sound of failure, the soundtrack to a night 10 years ago that had fractured his world. From his leather-trimmed cocoon, the city of Seattle dissolved into a watercolor of bleeding neon and blurred headlights. He was a king in a silent, moving castle utterly detached from the world outside. But then a flicker of humanity snagged his attention, a splash of color and stillness in the chaotic flow. It was a young woman slumped against the graffiti-scarred plastic of a bus stop, fast asleep. For the girl at the bus stop, the rain wasn't a memory. It was just another misery soaking the edges of her life. Neither of them knew that this rainy Tuesday night was a hinge point, the moment their two vastly different worlds would collide with the force of a thunderclap. The man in the back of the Bentley Mulsanne wasn't supposed to be looking out the window. He was supposed to be reviewing the Q3 projections from Crawford Global's Asian markets on his tablet. Graham Crawford, at 42, had built an empire on meticulous attention to detail a trait that had earned him billions and cost him nearly everything else. His world was one of sterile boardrooms, calculated risks, and shareholder meetings where emotion was a liability. But tonight the numbers were just pixels. The city usually a backdrop for his ambition was pressing in. The relentless drumming of the rain on the roof felt like an accusation. 10 years. 10 years to the day since his younger sister Anna had walked out into a similar storm after an argument and never came back. They had found her car abandoned, and then nothing. The police had theories, but Graham had a certainty that ate at him like acid he had let her down. He had been so wrapped up in a hostile takeover bid that he'd dismissed her fears about her new boyfriend as youthful drama. He had told her to grow up. It was the last thing he ever said to her. "Just take the scenic route along the waterfront, Paul." Graham's voice was low, cutting through the hushed interior of the car. His driver, a stoic man who had been with him for 15 years, simply nodded his eyes, meeting Graham's in the rearview mirror for a fraction of a second. Paul knew what day it was. He expertly guided the $500,000 vehicle away from the direct route to Graham's sterile penthouse and towards the misty, melancholic expanse of Elliott Bay. That's when he saw her. She was huddled in a bus shelter, whose meager roof was failing to stop the wind-driven spray. Her uniform, a faded black polo shirt, and pants from a diner, was damp. Her head was tilted back against the hard plastic mouth, slightly agape, lost in a sleep that could only come from bone-deep exhaustion. Her worn-out sneakers were soaked through, and a threadbare backpack was clutched to her chest like a life raft. She looked young, maybe early 20s. A stray strand of dark blonde hair was plastered to her cheek by the damp. Something about her utter vulnerability resonated with the ghost in his memory. Anna had been vulnerable too. She had been alone out in the world, and he hadn't been there. Most nights, Graham would have registered the scene as little more than urban scenery, a sad but commonplace footnote in the city's story. He was a philanthropist, of course. He wrote 7-figure checks to shelters and foundations, his name etched onto plaques in hospital wings. It was clean, efficient charity conducted from a distance. This was different. This was messy. Human. "Pull over, Paul." The driver slowed the massive car to a silent stop, 50 feet past the bus shelter. "Sir." Graham didn't answer. He just watched her in the side mirror. She wasn't stirring. The last bus on this route had likely run an hour ago. What was she doing here, waiting for a ride that wasn't coming, or did she simply have nowhere else to go? The thought sent a jolt through him, cold and sharp. He undid his seatbelt. Paul immediately tensed. "Mr. Crawford, I don't think that's wise." "I'm not getting out," Graham said, his eyes still fixed on the mirror. "Just wait." He watched for 5 long minutes. The street was deserted. save for the occasional passing car that sent a tidal wave of gutter water splashing against the curb. The girl shivered in her sleep, pulling the thin backpack tighter. It was a hopelessly inadequate defense against the biting coastal chill. This was madness. He was Graham Crawford. He didn't get involved. But the image of Anna's face, pale and pleading in his memory, swam before his eyes. He had failed her. He couldn't fail a complete stranger, could he? Or rather, he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. He reached into his wallet, his fingers brushing past the platinum credit cards. He pulled out all the cash he had, $500 in crisp 50s. Then he took out one of his personal business cards. It was thick cream-colored cardstock, with nothing but his name and a single private phone number embossed in stark black ink. "Paul," he said, his voice firm, "I need you to do something for me. Don't say my name, don't mention the car, just give her this." He passed the cash and the card to the front. Paul took them, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. He got out of the car, the automatic umbrella snapping open with a soft whoosh. He was a big man, and Graham watched as he approached the shelter, his movements deliberate so as not to startle her. The girl woke with a jolt as Paul's shadow fell over her. Graham could see her body tense, her eyes wide with fear. A cornered animal. Paul spoke, his voice too low for Graham to hear, and extended the money and the card. The girl stared at it, then at Paul, then at the sleek, dark car idling down the street. She shook her head fiercely, trying to push it away. Pride or fear, or both. Paul spoke again, more gently this time, placing the offering on the bench beside her. He then retreated, walking back to the car with measured steps, melting back into the driver's seat without a word. "She didn't take it," Graham stated, his voice flat. "It's on the bench, sir. I told her it was from someone who believed everyone deserves a safe place to sleep and to call the number if she needed a real job. Then I left before she could argue." Graham watched as the girl stared at the cash and the small white card as if they were a snake. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and picked them up. She looked down the street at the car, her expression unreadable in the gloom. Then, as Paul put the car into gear and they pulled away, she quickly shoved them into the pocket of her thin jacket. As the Bentley merged back into the river of traffic, Graham finally looked at the Q3 projections on his tablet. The numbers were just as they were before, but his world had tilted slightly on its axis. He had intervened. He had crossed a line he'd drawn for himself years ago. He told himself it was a simple act of charity, a salve for his conscience on a difficult anniversary. He was wrong. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Marina Lockwood felt the ghost of the bus stop encounter all through her double shift the next day. The $500 was a miracle, a temporary dam against a flood of debt, but the business card felt like a dangerous curiosity. Graham Crawford. The name was stark and powerful. A quick search on her phone during her break had sent her reeling. He wasn't just rich, he was a titan, a name synonymous with global logistics and technology. It had to be a prank. A cruel, elaborate joke, or worse, a proposition of a kind she wanted no part of. Her life was a precarious balancing act. By day she served lukewarm coffee and greasy eggs at the Pike Place diner, forcing a smile for tourists, while her feet screamed in protest. By night she crashed on the lumpy couch of her friend Sophie after being evicted from her shoebox apartment for being 2 months behind on rent. Every spare dollar was wired back to Ukraine to pay for the experimental treatment her mother needed, a ravenous financial black hole that swallowed her youth and her dreams. The sleep at the bus stop hadn't been a choice. Sophie's new boyfriend had brought a friend over, and Marina, feeling like an intruder in her only sanctuary, had opted for the cold anonymity of the street rather than the suffocating tension of the tiny apartment. "You look like death warmed over," Sophie said, sliding a cup of coffee towards Marina as she cleared a table. "Did you even sleep? A little?" Marina lied, stuffing a handful of tips into her apron. "You know you don't have to leave when Mark has people over. It's your space too," Sophie said, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "I know. I just needed some air." The lie tasted bitter. The bell above the diner door chimed, announcing a new customer. Marina, without looking up, grabbed a menu. "Welcome to Pike Place, I'll be right with—" She stopped. Standing just inside the door, looking impossibly out of place, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, was him. She didn't recognize his face from the night before, as she'd only seen his driver, but she recognized the aura of immense wealth and power that clung to him like expensive cologne. He was older than her, with sharp, intelligent eyes, the color of steel, and a subtle silvering at his temples. His gaze swept the diner and landed on her. There was a flicker of recognition. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The punchline to the joke. He walked towards her, his expensive Italian shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. He didn't take a table. He stopped right in front of her. "Miss Lockwood?" he asked. His voice was the same low, resonant tone from the car. Now she knew. This was the man from the Bentley. The entire diner seemed to fall silent. Sophie froze mid-motion, wiping down the counter. Yes," Marina stammered, clutching the plastic menu like a shield. "Do I know you?" "My name is Graham Crawford. My driver left you my card last night." Marina's blood ran cold. He knew her name. How did he know her name? She glanced at her name tag, a flimsy piece of plastic pinned to her uniform. "Of course. Look, I appreciate the money," she said, her voice barely a whisper, acutely aware of the prying eyes of her co-workers and the few remaining customers. It was very generous. "But I can't accept anything else. I'm not here to offer you money," he said, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to offer you the job my driver mentioned." Marina let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A job doing what, sir, with all due respect? I think you have the wrong person. I'm a waitress." "I'm aware," he said calmly. "I own a large property on the outskirts of the city, an estate. It's been unoccupied for some time. I require a caretaker, someone to live on the premises, ensure the grounds are maintained by the contracted service, manage the housekeeping staff who come in twice a week, and generally be a presence there. It's a position of trust." Marina stared at him, convinced she was hallucinating from lack of sleep. "A caretaker for an estate. Why me you saw me sleeping at a bus stop? I'm hardly a prime candidate for a position of trust." On the contrary, Graham said, his gaze unwavering. "You were exhausted. You were in a desperate situation. And yet you hesitated to take money from a stranger. When you did take it, you looked at my car not with avarice but with suspicion. That tells me you have pride and caution. Those are valuable qualities. I can teach you the rest." The diner was now so quiet, Marina could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Sophie was openly gaping. The position comes with a private apartment, on the grounds all living expenses covered, and a salary of $4,000 a month. He continued as if discussing the weather. Marina's mind short-circuited. $4,000. That was more than she made in 3 months of grueling shifts. It was enough to cover her mother's treatment and start saving. It was a lifeline. It was also completely insane. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice sharp, with the cynicism of someone who had learned that nothing in life was free. For the first time, A flicker of something sadness, perhaps, crossed his face. "The catch," he said softly, "is that the house is very large and very quiet. It can be lonely. The previous caretaker retired last month. I need someone who understands solitude." He saw the desperation in her eyes, warring with her deep-seated mistrust. He understood it. He was asking her to take a leap of faith into a world she couldn't possibly comprehend based on the word of a man she'd just met. "I've had my assistant David Chen conduct a preliminary background check based on your name tag and employment records," he added, preempting her next question. "I know you have no criminal record. I know you send most of your money overseas. I'm not a monster, Miss Lockwood. I'm a man in need of a reliable employee." The mention of the background check was both chilling and strangely reassuring. This wasn't some random, impulsive act. It was calculated. It was business that she could understand better than charity. She looked around the greasy diner at the chipped mugs and the sticky ketchup bottles. She thought of Sophie's cramped couch, of the gnawing anxiety that was her constant companion. What was her alternative? More nights of exhaustion, the constant fear of not making enough for her mother. "Okay," she heard herself say the word, feeling foreign in her own mouth. "When would I start?" A ghost of a smile touched Graham Crawford's lips. "Your shift ends at 3. My driver will be outside." And just like that, he turned and walked out, the bell chiming his departure. The diner erupted in a buzz of whispers. Sophie rushed over, grabbing Marina's arm. "Marina, are you crazy? You can't be serious. This is not real. He could be a serial killer, a human trafficker, a serial killer who runs a multi-billion-dollar public company and had his assistant run a background check on me." Marina countered, though her own heart was pounding with the same fear. "Soph, I have to do this. What other chance am I going to get?" The rest of her shift passed in a blur. At 3 o'clock, she took off her apron for the last time, collected her meager belongings from the staff room, and walked out the diner door. The sleek black Bentley was waiting, a silent promise of a different universe. The driver Paul got out and opened the rear door for her without a word. As she slid onto the plush leather seat, the door closing with a heavy, satisfying thud that sealed off the noise of the city, Marina felt a profound sense of dislocation. Just yesterday she had been invisible, another piece of the city's struggling underclass. Today she was being chauffeured away from her old life by a billionaire. It felt like a fairy tale, and Marina Lockwood had stopped believing in those a long time ago. She clutched her backpack, her only worldly possession, and braced herself. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was either the best decision of her life or the very last one she would ever make. The journey from the grimy streets of downtown Seattle to the Crawford estate was like traveling between dimensions. The city's dense architecture gradually gave way to sprawling suburbs, which in turn dissolved into pristine, winding roads flanked by towering evergreen forests. The rain had stopped, and a weak afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, dappling the road in shifting patterns of light and shadow. After a 30-minute drive, Paul turned the Bentley onto a private road marked by an unassuming but clearly expensive stone pillar. They followed the road for another half-mile before a set of immense wrought-iron gates appeared, set into a high stone wall that vanished into the trees on either side. The gates swung open silently, and the car proceeded up a long, sweeping driveway. Marina pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. The grounds were immaculate, manicured lawns that rolled like green oceans, dotted with ancient oaks and carefully sculpted gardens. But there was a stillness, a kind of preserved-in-amber quality to the place. It was beautiful, but it felt unlived in. Then the house came into view, and her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion, a sprawling edifice of grey stone, dark timber, and vast panes of glass that reflected the dramatic Pacific Northwest sky. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture seamlessly blended with the natural landscape, yet it possessed a cold, formidable presence, more like a corporate headquarters or a museum than a home. Paul brought the car to a stop in a circular courtyard, centered on a silent, modern fountain. He came around to open her door. "Welcome to Northwood Estate, Miss Lockwood." As Marina stepped out, clutching her backpack, the main doors of the mansion opened. A man in his late 20s, with sharp features, impeccably styled black hair, and a slim-fit suit stood waiting. His expression was neutral professional, but his eyes assessed her in a single swift glance that took in her worn sneakers and cheap jeans. "Miss Lockwood," he said, his voice crisp, "I am David Chen, Mr. Crawford's executive assistant. Please come inside." Marina followed him into a foyer so vast it seemed to have its own weather system. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, and the floor was polished black marble that reflected the light from a huge abstract chandelier. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon oil and old stone. The silence was absolute. "Mr. Crawford has been called away on an urgent business matter and won't be back until tomorrow evening." David explained, his tone all business. "He asked me to show you to your accommodations and brief you on your duties." He led her through a series of cavernous rooms filled with minimalist furniture, expensive art, and an unnerving lack of personal effects. There were no photographs, no clutter, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was a showcase, not a home. Finally, he led her down a separate wing to a heavy oak door, which he opened with a keycard. "This will be your apartment." Marina stepped inside and gasped. It was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. There was a spacious living room with a kitchenette, a separate bedroom with a queen-sized bed, and a modern bathroom with a walk-in shower. The furniture was simple but elegant, and a large window looked out onto a secluded section of the garden. "Your salary will be direct deposited on the 1st and 15th of each month." David continued, placing a tablet and a thin binder on the coffee table. "This tablet is connected to the estate's security and maintenance systems. You'll receive alerts for any issues. The binder contains contact information for all approved vendors, landscaping, pool, maintenance, housekeeping, and emergency services. Your primary duty is to be the point of contact. You authorize access at the gate via the tablet you supervise their work to ensure it meets Mr. Crawford's standards, and you report any anomalies directly to me." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Your secondary and perhaps most important duty is simply to be here. The estate is not to be left unoccupied for more than 4 hours at a time. Mr. Crawford values security and privacy above all else. Is that clear?" "Yes, perfectly," Marina said, her voice a little hoarse. "Good. A car will be provided for your personal use. A modest SUV, it's in the garage. Groceries and essentials can be ordered for delivery. Mr. Crawford prefers you minimize trips off the estate." He sounded like he was programming a robot. Suddenly, a sharp, feminine voice echoed from the hallway. "David, is this her?" A woman appeared in the doorway. She was tall, rail-thin, and exquisitely dressed in a silk blouse and tailored trousers. She looked to be around Graham's age, with the same steely eyes, but where his held a quiet melancholy. Hers were hard and sharp, like chips of ice. "Miss Crawford," David said, his professional mask tightening slightly. "Yes, this is Miss Lockwood." Catherine Crawford's eyes swept over Marina from head to toe, and her perfectly shaped lips curled into a faint sneer. "Lockwood how? Ethnic?" Let me guess you're the new charity case my brother picked up off the street. Marina stiffened her cheeks, flushing hot. I'm the new caretaker. Caretaker charity case. Tomato, tomato, Catherine said with a dismissive wave of her hand. I just want to make one thing clear to you, Miss Lockwood. My brother has a bleeding heart, a weakness he inherited from our mother. He sees strays and thinks he can save them. But this, she gestured around the vast, silent house, is not a shelter. This is the Crawford family home. You are an employee. You are not his project, and you are certainly not his friend. Do your job, stay out of sight, and don't get any foolish ideas. Graham gets bored of his little projects eventually. The venom in her voice was shocking. Marina, who had faced down drunk customers and aggressive landlords, found herself speechless. Catherine, a deep voice interrupted. Graham Crawford stood behind his sister, his expression dark. He had returned sooner than expected. That's enough. Catherine turned, unfazed. Graham, darling, I was just welcoming your new staff member, making sure she understands the boundaries. I am perfectly capable of explaining the terms of employment to Miss Lockwood. He said, his voice dangerously quiet. David, thank you. You may go. David nodded and made a swift, silent exit. Catherine shot Marina one last withering glare before turning back to her brother. Honestly, Graham, a waitress from a bus stop after what happened with Anna, have you lost your mind? You're just inviting trouble into this house. The mention of the name Anna made the air crackle with tension. Graham's jaw tightened. Anna has nothing to do with this, and you will treat Miss Lockwood with respect. She's my employee, and as such a guest in this house. Is that understood? Catherine let out an exasperated sigh. Fine. Have it your way. Play the white knight. But when this blows up in your face, and it will don't come crying to me. She turned on her heel and stormed out her expensive heels, clicking angrily on the marble floor. An uncomfortable silence descended. Graham stood in the doorway looking tired. I apologize for my sister, he said finally. She can be abrasive. Abrasive is one word for it, Marina muttered before she could stop herself. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Yes, well, she is fiercely protective of our family's privacy. He looked around the small apartment, then at Marina, standing awkwardly with her tattered backpack. Is this acceptable? It's more than I could have imagined, she said honestly. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Graham, he corrected her. If you're going to live in my house, you should use my name. He paused, his gaze softening for a moment. Get some rest, Marina. You look like you need it. He turned and left, leaving Marina alone in the quiet, sterile luxury of her new apartment. She dropped her backpack on the floor and sank onto the sofa, the silence of the massive house pressing in on her. Catherine's words echoed in her mind. Stray charity case. Don't get any foolish ideas. She was in a gilded cage, a beautiful prison paid for by a man she didn't know, and despised by a woman who saw her as less than human. The $4,000 a month suddenly felt like combat pay. She had her safety, her security, but she had a sinking feeling she had just traded one kind of struggle for another, far more complicated one. She was no longer fighting for survival, but for her dignity. The first few weeks at Northwood Estate passed in a surreal, silent routine. Marina learned the rhythms of the house, the quiet hum of the climate control, the distant whir of the pool filters, the precise, almost invisible work of the twice-weekly housekeeping crew. She managed the landscapers signed for packages and patrolled the endless hallways, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floors. The tablet David had given her, became an extension of her hand, a digital leash connecting her to the estate's vast automated nervous system. The loneliness Graham had warned her about was a palpable presence. It seeped from the cold stone walls and pooled in the shadows of the high-ceilinged rooms. The house wasn't empty. It was haunted by an absence. Marina felt it most strongly in the east wing, which Graham seemed to avoid entirely. One afternoon, driven by curiosity, she pushed open one of the doors and found a room left untouched for years. It was a girl's bedroom, decorated in shades of lavender and cream. A collection of ballet trophies sat on a shelf, and books on art history were stacked neatly on a desk. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through the window. It had to be Anna's room. Marina backed out slowly, closing the door with a quiet click, feeling like a trespasser on sacred ground. Graham was an enigma. He was often gone for days at a time, traveling for business. When he was home, he was a phantom, working from his cavernous office, or sitting alone in the immense library, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the fireplace. Their interactions were brief and formal. A polite good morning in a hallway, a short question about the estate's maintenance. Yet Marina began to notice small things. He started taking his dinner, not in the formal dining room, but at the small table in the massive, state-of-the-art kitchen, often at the same time she was preparing her own simple meal. The first time it happened, the silence was agonizing. "Please don't let me interrupt you," he'd said, sitting down with a plate of salmon and asparagus prepared by a catering service. "You're not," she'd replied, busying herself at the stove. Gradually, conversation began to bloom in the quiet space. It started with simple things, the weather, a problem with the irrigation system. Then, one evening, he asked about the book she was reading. "It's a collection of Ukrainian folk tales," she said, surprised. "My mother used to read them to me. Your family is in Ukraine," he asked, his interest seemingly genuine. "My mother is," Marina said, a familiar ache in her chest. "She's not well." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press, but his gaze softened with an empathy that felt real. The next day, he left a beautifully bound edition of English poetry on the kitchen counter for her, with a simple note. "Thought you might enjoy this." It was a small gesture, but it was the first crack in the formal facade between them. Marina began to see the man beneath the billionaire, a man weighed down by a profound sadness. She suspected it had everything to do with the ghost of his sister, Anna. Catherine, on the other hand, remained a relentlessly hostile presence. She would appear at the estate unannounced, her visits always leaving Marina feeling small and scrutinized. She would conduct her own inspections, running a finger over a surface to check for dust, or criticizing the arrangement of flowers Marina had cut from the garden. "You know, my brother seems to have taken a liking to you," Catherine remarked one afternoon, finding Marina in the library, organizing a new shipment of books for Graham. Her tone made it sound like an accusation. "I'm just doing my job, Miss Crawford," Marina said, keeping her back to her. "See that you do," Catherine purred, walking closer. Because Graham's judgment, especially when it comes to young women in trouble, is notoriously poor. He's sentimental. He thinks he can fix broken things. But some things, she paused, her voice dropping, are broken beyond repair, and they tend to break everything else around them. The threat was clear. Marina was the broken thing. The veiled threats were one thing, but Marina was more worried about what Catherine might do than what she said. One evening, Marina was on a video call with her mother. Her mother looked frail, her face pale against the hospital pillows, but her eyes lit up seeing her daughter. They spoke in rapid, hushed Ukrainian, a comfort Marina desperately needed. "How are you, moya ptashka, my little bird?" her mother asked. "I'm fine, Mama. The new job is good. It's quiet," Marina said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Are the doctors treating you well? Did the last wire transfer arrive?" Yes, everything is fine," her mother reassured her, though Marina could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "But Marina, you must be careful. Please tell me you have heard nothing from Dmitri." Marina's blood ran cold at the name. "No, Mama. Nothing. He is in the past. He doesn't know where I am." "Good. Keep it that way. He is a poison, that man. A snake." What Marina didn't know was that Catherine had recently hired a private investigator, not a corporate firm, but a discreet, unscrupulous man named Finch, who specialized in digging up the kind of dirt that didn't appear on standard background checks. "Find out everything about her," Catherine had instructed him in a sterile coffee shop downtown. "Marina Lockwood. I want to know where she came from, who her family is, every friend, every ex-boyfriend. I want to know what she's running from. My brother may be blind, but I'm not. Nobody's that clean." Finch, a man who reveled in the secrets of others, had simply smiled. "For the right price, Miss Crawford, I can find out what she had for breakfast a decade ago." A week later, Finch called Catherine. "I've got something," he said, his voice laced with triumph. Back in Chicago before she came to Seattle, she was involved with a man, a Ukrainian immigrant like her. Name's Dmitri Volkov, small-time con artist but charismatic. They had a shared bank account that was flagged for suspicious activity, a check-cashing scheme. Charges were filed but then dropped, right around the time our Miss Lockwood packed her bags and disappeared overnight. And it looks like Mr. Volkov is still very interested in locating her. He seems to believe she owes him something. Catherine listened, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her face. "Dmitri Volkov," she repeated the name. "Finch, I don't just want to know where he is. I want you to find him. And then you're going to give him my number." The trap was being set. While Marina was slowly, cautiously building a fragile trust with Graham in the quiet halls of Northwood, the ghosts of her past were being deliberately summoned, and the gilded cage she inhabited was about to become a battlefield. The tentative peace at Northwood Estate began to feel real. Graham started spending more time at home, his business trips becoming shorter and less frequent. Their kitchen table conversations grew longer, stretching from polite inquiries into genuine discussions. He spoke of his passion for architecture, the philosophy behind the design of the estate. Marina, in turn, shared stories of her childhood in Kyiv, painting vivid pictures of a life before hardship had leached the color from her world. She spoke of her mother's garden, her father's love for chess, but she carefully built a wall around the years in Chicago, and especially around Dmitri. Graham found himself drawn to her resilience. She wasn't cowed by his wealth or his sister's hostility. She had a quiet dignity that he admired more than any social grace. He noticed how she'd started a small herb garden in a neglected patch of soil behind the kitchen, her hands, which had served greasy food, now tending to new life. The house, which for a decade had felt like Anna's mausoleum, was starting to feel a little more like a home. There was the smell of baking bread one afternoon, the sound of her soft humming another. She was breathing life back into the place, and into him. One rainy afternoon, he found her in the library, staring up at a large, abstract oil painting, a chaotic swirl of deep blues and violent slashes of white. "It's called Storm on the Sound," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I bought it a year after—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. "A year after Anna disappeared." "It feels angry," Marina said softly, "and lost." "That's how I felt," Graham confessed, the admission costing him. "For a long time, I felt like I was drowning in something I couldn't see. He turned to look at her, the space between them charged with unspoken emotion. Having you here, it's been quieter. The house, my head, it's been quieter. Marina's heart fluttered. This was dangerous territory. She was an employee, a stray he'd taken in. She couldn't afford to misread his kindness as something more. But the look in his eyes was undeniable. "I'm glad I can help," she said, her voice barely a whisper, before turning and fleeing the room, leaving Graham alone with the storm in the painting. Meanwhile, Catherine was putting the pieces of her cruel game into place. Finch had located Dmitry Volkov in Portland, where he was running a low-level insurance scam. He was charming, manipulative, and deeply bitter about Marina's disappearance. Catherine, using a burner phone, made the call. "Mr. Volkov," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "My name is Catherine Crawford. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Marina Lockerwood. And I believe you're looking for her." Dmitry was instantly wary. "Who is this? What do you want?" "What I want is irrelevant. What I have is an opportunity for you," Catherine explained. "Marina has fallen into a rather comfortable situation. She's living on my brother's estate. He's a very wealthy man, and he seems to think she's some kind of saint. I, however, knows better. I know about Chicago. I know she left you high and dry." She let the lie hang in the air. Dmitry, ever the opportunist, seized it. "She did more than that. She stole from me. $10,000. Money we were saving." Catherine smiled. The amount didn't matter. The accusation did. 10,000. "That's a shame. My brother is hosting the annual Crawford Foundation Gala in 2 weeks. It's a very high-profile, very public event. I could arrange for you to be there. Imagine the scene, Mr. Volkov, Marina dressed up in borrowed finery, playing the part of the rescued princess. And then you appear, a voice from her past demanding what you are owed. In front of my brother, his business partners, the city's elite. I doubt her little charade would survive." Dmitry was silent for a moment, the gears turning in his head. "What's in it for you?" "Let's just say, I have a vested interest in revealing people's true character," Catherine said coldly. "I'll send you a suit and a ticket. All you have to do is show up and tell your story. Can you do that? For a chance to see Marina's face when she sees me?" Dmitry's voice was laced with a nasty glee. "Oh, I can definitely do that." The plan was in motion. Catherine felt a thrill of victory. She would expose Marina as a common thief and a liar, and in doing so, she would prove to Graham how foolish and reckless his sentimentality was. She would have her brother back, and the house would be silent and pure once more. As the date of the gala approached, the atmosphere at Northwood shifted. Designers and stylists began arriving, sent by Graham to prepare a dress for Marina. He had insisted she attend not as staff, but as his guest. "I won't know anyone. I'll be completely out of place," she protested as a stylist measured her for a gown. "You'll be with me," Graham said simply, his gaze steady and reassuring. "I want you there." His insistence felt like more than an order from a boss. It felt personal. Terrified but also undeniably thrilled, Marina agreed. When the dress arrived, it was a masterpiece of dark sapphire silk that shimmered like a midnight sky. Looking at her reflection, Marina barely recognized the exhausted waitress from the bus stop. She saw an elegant, poised woman. But underneath the silk, her skin was crawling with anxiety. She felt like an imposter, a fraud waiting to be discovered. The night of the gala, Graham came to her apartment door. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo, looking impossibly handsome. He stopped dead when he saw her. "Marina," he breathed. "You look incredible." "It's the dress," she said, blushing. No, he said, his eyes locking with hers. It's you. He offered her his arm, and as they walked through the marble halls of the mansion towards the waiting Bentley, Marina allowed herself a moment of fantasy. She let herself believe that this was real, that she belonged here by his side. It was a beautiful, fragile dream, and it was about to be shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The Crawford Foundation Gala was the pinnacle of Seattle's social calendar, a glittering affair held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. The air hummed with the quiet clinking of champagne glasses, polite laughter, and the murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and summering in the Hamptons. Marina clung to Graham's arm, feeling like a foreign bird in a flock of peacocks. The sapphire gown may have been a perfect disguise, but her insides were a knot of sheer terror. Graham was a gracious host, navigating the crowded room with an easy confidence. He introduced Marina simply as, "My dear friend, Marina," a title that sent a warm flutter through her chest, but also amplified her feeling of being a fraud. She exchanged pleasantries with tech moguls, surgeons, and philanthropists, all of whom smiled at her with a polite curiosity that felt laced with judgment. They were all wondering the same thing: who is she? Catherine was holding court across the room, a magnificent vulture in black Chanel. She watched Marina's every move, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Every time Marina met her gaze, Catherine would offer a thin, knowing smile that made Marina's blood run cold. She knew something. An hour into the event, Graham was called to the stage to give the keynote address. "I'll be right back," he whispered to Marina, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze before weaving his way through the crowd. Left alone, Marina felt a fresh wave of panic. She took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, hoping it would steady her nerves. She found a relatively quiet spot near a large potted palm and tried to make herself invisible. "You clean up well. I almost didn't recognize you without the grease stains on your apron." The voice was like a phantom from a nightmare. It was slick with a familiar Ukrainian accent that he tried to mask with American slang. Marina froze her champagne flute, trembling in her hand. She turned slowly. Dmitry Volkov stood before her, looking disturbingly handsome in a well-fitted tuxedo. His dark hair was slicked back, and his smile was the same predatory grin she had spent the last 2 years running from. "Dmitry," she breathed, her voice catching in her throat. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "A little bird told me where to find you," he said, his eyes roaming over her expensive dress with a look that was both appreciative and possessive. "Told me you'd landed on your feet. Looks like she was right. You always did have a knack for latching onto men with money." "You need to leave," Marina said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "You're not welcome here." "Not welcome, Marina, darling, I'm a guest," he said, flashing an official invitation card. "Besides, we have unfinished business, you and I. You disappeared with my $10,000. Did you think I would just forget?" The lie was so audacious, so familiar. It was his signature move, twisting the truth until she was the villain. The $10,000 had been her savings money she had scraped together for her mother, which he had borrowed. For a sure-thing investment, right before vanishing, leaving her with an empty bank account and a pile of his debts. "That was my money, Dmitry, and you know it," she hissed, trying to keep her voice down. "That's not how I remember it," he said, his smile widening as he saw the fear in her eyes. "And I don't think your new benefactor would like to hear that his little charity project is a common thief." He was enjoying this cornering her, watching her squirm. Before she could respond, Graham was returning from the stage, a warm smile on his face. The smile vanished as he saw Marina's pale, stricken expression and the man standing too close to her. "Marina, is everything all right?" Graham asked, his eyes narrowing at Dmitri. "Do I know you?" "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," Dmitri said, extending a hand. "Dmitri Volkov. I'm an old friend of Marina's. From Chicago. We have a lot of catching up to do." Graham looked from Dmitri's smug face to Marina's terrified one. He didn't shake the offered hand. "Is that so?" At that moment, as if on cue, Catherine glided over to join them, her expression one of feigned concern. "Oh, good. You've all met Mr. Volkov. What a surprise to see you here. I believe you were just telling Marina you had something important to discuss. It was a trap, a perfectly orchestrated public execution. As a matter of fact, I was—" Dmitri said, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "I was just asking Marina when she planned on paying me back the $10,000 she stole from me when she skipped town." A collective gasp went through the immediate crowd. Conversations nearby sputtered and died. All eyes were on Marina Graham and the handsome stranger making the shocking accusation. Marina felt the floor drop away. The faces around her blurred. This was her worst fear realized. She looked at Graham, and the confusion and dawning hurt in his eyes were like a physical blow. He didn't know what to believe. He saw a terrified woman he cared for and a confident man making a direct public claim. "That's a lie!" Marina cried, her voice thin and desperate. "He's the one who stole from me." "Oh, Marina, darling." "Still so dramatic," Dmitri said with a theatrical sigh. "I have bank records. Proof of the transfer from our joint account to your personal one right before you vanished. What do you have, just tears?" Catherine placed a delicate hand on her brother's arm. "Graham, I am so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I had my suspicions. I warned you. I never imagined it was something this sordid." Graham looked at Marina, his face a mask of conflict and betrayal. He had opened his home, his life to her. He had started to trust her, to care for her. And now this. Her past had come calling, and it was ugly and criminal. The silence stretched thick with accusation. For Marina, it wasn't just a ballroom. It was the bus stop all over again. But this time, the cold was on the inside, and there was nowhere to run. "Marina," Graham said, his voice quiet and strained. "Is this true?" His question, filled with doubt, was the final twist of the knife. In that moment, she was utterly, completely alone. In the suffocating silence of the ballroom, Marina felt a lifetime of being a victim coalesce into a single point of defiance. She would not run. She would not cry. She would fight. Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at Dmitri, her voice steady and cold. "You want to talk about bank records, Dmitri? Let's talk about the $50,000 in debt you left me with after forging my signature on loan applications. Let's talk about the police report I filed in Chicago, the one I withdrew only because you called me crying and begging." Dmitri's confident smirk wavered. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Marina cut him off, turning her burning gaze on Catherine. "And you. You hunted him down and brought this parasite here. Why? Because you couldn't stand that your brother showed kindness to someone you deemed unworthy. You didn't do this to protect him. You did this to control him, to prove his compassion is a weakness." Catherine's mask of sympathy dissolved into pure venom. "She's a convincing liar, isn't she, Graham? It's what these people do. They prey on men like you." This was the moment of decision. Graham stood between his sister's lifelong influence and Marina's raw vulnerability. He looked at Catherine's face, twisted with a triumphant rage, and then at Marina's pale and tear-streaked, but unbroken. He saw the toxic possessiveness in one and the painful truth in the other. His choice was clear. He stepped forward, decisively moving to stand beside Marina. He took her hand, his grip firm and unwavering. The simple action was a seismic event, a declaration to the entire room. "You're right about one thing to Catherine," Graham said, his voice resonating with cold authority. "I am sentimental, but I am not a fool." He turned to Dmitri. "Mr. Volkov, you are trespassing. Security will escort you out. And tomorrow, my legal team will be contacting the Chicago PD about your loan fraud. I imagine they'll be very interested in reopening that case." Dmitri's face went white. Without another word, he turned and vanished into the crowd. Graham then faced his sister, the hurt in his eyes deep, but his resolve absolute. "You brought this poison into my life to wound this woman and to prove a point. Point taken. We will talk later. But for now, you should leave. You're choosing her over me." "Your family," Catherine gasped, aghast. "No," Graham said, his voice quiet but firm. "I am choosing trust over your suspicion. I'm choosing decency over your cruelty." Humiliated, Catherine shot Marina a look of pure hatred before stalking away, the crowd parting before her. The ballroom was still unnaturally quiet. Graham, still holding Marina's hand, turned to her. "Let's go home," he said softly. He led her out of the ballroom, away from the whispers and the prying eyes. As the Bentley pulled away, Marina looked at the man beside her. He hadn't just offered her a home. He had fought for her honor. He had believed in her. In the reflected glow of the city lights, she saw not a billionaire benefactor, but a partner. The gilded cage had become a sanctuary, and his unbelievable offer had become the foundation for a life she never thought possible. That night wasn't a fairy tale ending where a prince saves a pauper. It was something far more real and infinitely more meaningful. It was the story of how two broken people, scarred by their pasts and wary of the world, chose to believe in each other. Graham didn't rescue Marina. He gave her a safe harbor where she could rescue herself. And in watching her fight for her truth, Marina rescued Graham from the lonely prison of his own grief, reminding him that a house is just stone and glass until someone with courage and heart makes it a home. Their journey was just beginning, built not on a grand romantic gesture, but on the quiet, sturdy foundation of mutual respect and the shared understanding that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in mansions, but in the strength of the human spirit. If their story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness and truth are the most powerful currencies we have, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you were moved, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story about the incredible twists and turns that make up our lives. Thank you for listening.